Hello, everyone. My name is Anna, and I'm sharing this story because I need to believe that by speaking it out loud, I can finally start to heal. What I'm about to tell you sounds like a script from a bad soap opera, but every devastating word of it is true. It's the story of how the man I loved, the man I swore to spend forever with, convinced me he was dying of terminal cancer, only to reveal himself as a monster who was trying to steal every penny I had. Our life, before the diagnosis, was comfortable. We weren't wealthy, but we were happy, or so I thought. Mark was charming, quick-witted, and seemed to genuinely adore me. We met at a small, slightly chaotic charity gala. He was the one cracking jokes in the corner, and I was immediately drawn to his easy confidence. He ran his own small construction consultancy firm. He always talked about the big contracts he was close to signing, the major deals that were just around the corner. He had that entrepreneurial spirit, the kind that promised a future full of possibility. We dated for 2 years, got married, and settled into a beautiful 1950s bungalow that we spent weekends lovingly restoring. We talked about having kids, 2, maybe 3. He was the stable center I never knew I needed. He handled most of the finances. He was better with numbers, he'd always say, and I trusted him implicitly. I had my own steady job as a mid-level manager in tech, which gave us a solid dual income. My income was the reliable backbone. His was the promised high-potential surge. The first sign that something was truly wrong wasn't a sudden pain or a doctor's call. It was silence. Mark, usually so verbose, became withdrawn. He started sleeping more, and the light in his eyes seemed to dim. I initially attributed it to stress from his business. The big contracts weren't materializing, and he seemed increasingly worried about cash flow. He'd snap at me over minor things, something he never did before. Then came the day that shattered my world. It was a Tuesday evening. I came home to find him sitting in our dimly lit living room, a half-empty bottle of scotch on the coffee table, another uncharacteristic habit he'd developed. He looked pale, utterly defeated. "Anna, we need to talk," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. I immediately knew it wasn't about the business. This was different. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He didn't look at me as he spoke. "I haven't been feeling well for months, just fatigue and these headaches. I finally went to the doctor last week. They ran some tests." He paused, taking a long, shuddering breath. "It's not good, Anna. It's stage 4 pancreatic cancer." The air left the room. The world became muffled, distant. I remember sinking onto the couch beside him, my mind unable to process the words, stage 4. That was the death sentence, wasn't it? Pancreatic cancer was notoriously aggressive. "No," I whispered, the denial a sharp, involuntary protest. "No, you must have the tests mixed up. There must be a mistake." He reached out and took my hand, his grip surprisingly weak. I wish more than anything this was a mistake. But I got a second opinion. They confirmed it. The doctors say. They say I have maybe 6 months, a year at most, with aggressive treatment. Tears streamed down my face, hot and unstoppable. My strong, confident husband reduced to this frail, terrified shell. I pulled him into a desperate hug, sobbing into his shoulder. All the stress, the sleepless nights, the exhaustion. It suddenly made terrible sense he hadn't been stressed about money. He had been silently battling this horrific reality. In that moment, all our previous problems, the financial strains, the small arguments, vanished. All that mattered was Mark. My priorities shifted instantly. I became his rock, his caregiver, his fiercest advocate. We spent the next few weeks in a blur of appointments. He'd take time off work for chemo, which he insisted on attending alone, saying he didn't want me to see him at his worst. He'd come home pale, nauseous, and deeply exhausted. He had the symptoms down perfectly. He shaved his head preemptively, citing the impending hair loss, and the vulnerability of the baldness only twisted the knife deeper into my heart. "We need to get our affairs in order, Anna," he'd say late at night, holding me tight. "I want to make sure you're taken care of." This conversation always led back to finances. He said his medical bills were astronomical, far exceeding what his minimal health insurance would cover. He explained that his business had actually been failing for some time, and the looming medical expenses were going to bankrupt us both. He started talking about my retirement fund, my 401k that I had meticulously built up over 15 years. "It's the only liquid asset we have that isn't tied up in the house or my business debts," he explained, his voice heavy with self-pity. "If we liquidate it now, we can cover the first round of the really expensive cutting-edge trial drugs that might buy me a little more time. Just a little more time with you, my love." How could I refuse? The man I loved was facing death, begging for a few more months, and the price was just money. Money I wouldn't need until my old age, but he wouldn't even reach old age. I signed the forms. I authorized the transfer. Nearly $250,000, my future security, was moved out of my 401k and into a joint account Mark controlled, supposedly to pay for his life-saving, or at least life-extending treatments. I was operating on pure grief and adrenaline. I quit my demanding management job, taking a less stressful role that allowed me to work remotely so I could be home to care for him. I cooked him nutrient-rich meals, stayed up researching alternative therapies, and held his hand through what I thought were the most painful moments of his life. He was masterful. He'd occasionally spill prescription bottles on the counter, real high-powered chemo and pain meds that he'd somehow managed to procure, which only solidified the reality for me. He spoke with authority about his prognosis, his blood counts, and the side effects of his treatment. He truly played the part of a man fading away. The money, he said, was rapidly being spent on his care. The new joint account was quickly draining. I didn't push. How could I? I was watching my husband die. But then the odd behavior started to creep in. Tiny cracks in his perfect facade that, in my grief-stricken state, I initially ignored. He started taking long, unannounced walks to clear his head after a supposed chemo session. He'd be gone for hours, not responding to texts. His phone was suddenly locked with a new, elaborate passcode he claimed was for work, even though he was supposedly unable to work. The first major warning sign came from a completely unexpected source. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. She cornered me one afternoon as I was retrieving the mail, her eyes narrowed with that familiar neighborhood watch intensity. "Anna, dear, you look so tired," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "How is Mark doing? Is he still fighting it?" "We are taking it day by day, Mrs. Henderson," I managed, fighting back a wave of exhaustion. She leaned in conspiratorially. "Well, I just saw the loveliest young lady leaving your house this morning, around 10 o'clock. Red sports car. Maybe she's a private nurse? You shouldn't be doing all this alone." I blinked. "A nurse? We don't have a private nurse, Mrs. Henderson." "Oh." She paused, looking genuinely confused. "Well, she certainly wasn't a doctor. She was very Glamorously dressed for a medical visit, dear. She was giggling as she got into that flashy red car. She seemed quite familiar with your Mark. My heart did a nasty flip. A beautiful young woman, a red sports car, giggling, visiting him while I was at my part-time job. This wasn't cancer. This was something else. A cold, hard dread, far worse than the grief, began to settle deep in my stomach. I knew in that sickening moment that I had to start looking into Mark's life, even if the truth destroyed what little hope I had left. Mrs. Henderson's words kept echoing in my mind. She seemed quite familiar with your Mark. Familiar. That single word began to shred the cocoon of love and trust I had woven around Mark's illness. She wasn't a nurse. She wasn't a doctor. Who was this woman? And more importantly, was she visiting him during the hours Mark claimed he was having grueling chemotherapy sessions? That evening, when Mark came home, he looked suitably drained. His face was pale, his movements slow. He was a theatrical genius. The naturalness of his performance was sickening. "How was treatment, sweetheart?" I asked, focusing on keeping my voice steady. "Terrible. This latest drug is really hitting hard. It feels like my insides are burning," he said, slumping onto the sofa. "I'm gonna lie down for a bit. Is it okay if I skip dinner tonight?" "Of course," I said, covering him with a blanket despite the cold suspicion pooling in my gut. While he slept, I began my search for evidence. My first stop was his cell phone, now perpetually locked. I didn't know the new passcode, but I knew Mark's habits. For years, I tried our birthdays, our anniversary, or our old pet's name. None of them worked. This was a new, complex code. That meant the secret he was hiding was huge. That frustration fueled my determination. My next target was the laptop he used for work. He always kept this computer away from me, claiming it held sensitive client information. Its password was usually different from his phone's, not knowing the phone code. I tried a combination for the laptop. The year Mark started his first business and the acronym of his favorite sports team. Astonishingly, it worked. However, the betrayal evidence I expected, love emails or suspicious bank transfers, didn't immediately pop up. Mark was a professional. He had deleted everything. But he forgot one thing: the browser history. Even in incognito mode, most browsers leave traces if you know where to look deep in the system files. I was a tech manager. He just thought I did construction consulting. I had taken digital forensics training at my job. Within minutes, I was pulling fragments from the depths of the supposedly erased history. What I found was a knife straight to my heart. The searches over the last 6 months were not legitimate inquiries about cancer symptoms, chemo side effects, or the best oncologists. What I found included red sports car models 2023, luxury apartments downtown LA, high-end jewelry stores online, how to fake medical records. This final search made my hand tremble. But the most shocking discovery was a name buried among the searches: Sierra. Mark had searched for an email about a fundraising event for a friend in intensive care a month prior. Within the email details for this Sierra, there was a residential address, the name of the luxury new downtown apartment complex. Mrs. Henderson had mentioned Sierra, red sports car, luxury apartment. I didn't sleep that night. Mark was next to me, breathing deeply like a dying man, while I sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers cold on the computer keys, piecing together the pattern of his betrayal. Had he used my retirement fund, my life savings, to set up a lavish life for another woman? The next day, as I had the day off, I told Mark I would be home all day to take care of him. Mark instantly grew agitated. No, Anna, I need to be at the hospital today for a special test. It's too draining. I don't want you to worry. Please go to the office and focus on your work for a bit. This was my chance. 10 minutes after Mark left for the hospital, I was out the door myself. I drove straight to the luxury apartment complex, whose address I had found. I parked down the street and walked toward the entrance. There, in the valet parking area, was Mark's red sports car. Brand new and gleaming, Mrs. Henderson had been right. I walked into the lobby, marble and glass, utterly luxurious. I spoke to the impeccably dressed woman at the reception desk. I asked for the name Sierra. Sierra Thompson? Yes, she's on the 7th floor, she said, frowning slightly. Who are you? I'm an old friend, I lied. I wanted to surprise her. I think I'll just head up to her apartment. The receptionist grew suspicious. I'm sorry, but I need to announce all visitors. Just then, 2 figures emerged from the back hallway. One was my husband, Mark, his walk energetic, utterly devoid of the fatigue he had been faking. The other was a tall, blonde, strikingly beautiful young woman dressed in bright, expensive clothes, Sierra. They were arm in arm, laughing riotously. They looked like they were having the time of their lives. This was not a man battling death. This was a man in love. We locked eyes. I will never forget the expression on Mark's face. It was a cocktail of shock, panic, and an instant deep hatred. He went ghost white, as if he had seen a true specter. Anna, what are you doing here? He hissed, pushing Sierra slightly behind him. I couldn't speak. A fist was caught in my throat, but Sierra wasn't shocked. She looked at me with a cool, arrogant expression. Who are you? She asked, her voice brassy and challenging. I'm his wife, I managed, my voice cracking but coming out firm. Sierra laughed, a loud, mocking sound. His wife? Oh, so you're the victim of the cancer scam. Mark told me you were naive, but this is pathetic. The cancer scam. In that moment, all the puzzle pieces in my mind snapped into place, completing a horrifying picture. Mark's paleness, the shaved head, the chemo sessions. It had all been an act. The whole thing was a lie? I asked Mark. No tears streamed down my face, only a cold, hollow rage. You faked a terminal illness? Mark finally recovered his composure. He wasn't acting anymore. This was the real Mark. Angry, caught, and dangerous. If you know everything, then yes, he yelled. The receptionist in the lobby jumped up. And so what? I had to lie to you, Anna. The business was failing. I was drowning in debt. That stupid 401k money was the only way to cover the arrears. Your trust was my only ticket. Sierra wrapped her arm around Mark's. Mark, honey, she's not worth the argument. Let's get to the car. Let this poor woman go back to her pathetic life. That was the moment all the pain turned to fire. My life, that money was my future, my retirement. You stole it from me. Mark was reckless now. Stole? I took it. You were my wife. You're not anymore. And that money belongs to my new life, our new life with Sierra. He spat, and he kissed Sierra right in front of me, shattering me completely, but I wouldn't break. I won't leave until I know exactly where that money went, I stated, my face an expressionless mask. Mark shrugged. Go ahead and find out, Anna, but you'll be left with nothing. Everything is legally in my hands. You are finished. A smile spread across my face, a grim, victorious smile. You're wrong, Mark. You are finished. My name is Anna, and I still have a few things held in reserve. You were just a consultant. I'm a manager, and I hate con artists. As I walked out of that luxury apartment, the look on Mark's face, not of regret but of fear of losing control, was the first step of my revenge plan. The moment I stepped out of that sickeningly luxurious lobby, the mask of grief and confusion evaporated. Mark thought he had destroyed me. He thought he had left me a shell, unable to fight back. What he didn't realize was that in all the years he spent building his house of lies, I was quietly building something much stronger, a career based on spotting patterns and mitigating risk. I wasn't just a mid-level manager. I was a problem solver who specialized in disaster recovery. I didn't go home. I drove directly to my former office, using my old key card to access a rarely used conference room. The familiar scent of coffee and dry erase markers was strangely grounding. Mark had played the part of the dying victim, but the real crisis was financial, and I was going to treat it like a corporate takeover. My first call was to David, my friend and a brilliant forensic accountant who had helped me navigate complex system audits for years. I gave him the short, brutal version. My husband faked terminal cancer, stole my 401k, and is now living with his mistress. I need to find where every penny went and expose his entire financial life, immediately. David, bless his professional heart, didn't ask a single judgment question. Send me everything you have, Anna, especially access to that laptop. I want bank statements, business tax returns, anything you can get your hands on. I'll start digging for offshore accounts and suspicious wire transfers. My second call was to Helen, an incredibly sharp divorce attorney known for her pit bull tenacity and deep understanding of financial fraud cases. Helen, I have a clear case of fraud and conversion of marital and non-marital assets. He stole nearly $250,000 from my retirement account under false pretenses. Terminal illness, I need to freeze every accessible asset immediately, starting with our joint checking and his business accounts. Helen's response was chillingly calm. Anna, fraudulent inducement to transfer funds due to a medical lie? That elevates this from a messy divorce to a potential criminal matter. We can use this to secure an emergency injunction and freeze anything traceable. But first, we need to know the why. You said he was drowning in debt. We need the full scope of that financial ruin. I returned home armed with a new resolve. Mark hadn't returned. He probably assumed I was either crying in a corner or packing my bags. He underestimated the cold, calculated fury of a woman who's been lied to about death. I went back to his laptop, now connected to my personal external hard drive. I used my technical skills to bypass his deleted files and focus on the deep system folders where his business accounting software stored its data backups. I wasn't looking for love letters. I was looking for liabilities. What I found made my blood run cold, confirming Mark's panicked confession in the lobby. His construction consultancy wasn't just failing, it was a ghost company drowning in catastrophic debt. The initial shock was the amount. Mark owed over $800,000 to various creditors. This wasn't simple business debt. It was a complex web of failed investments, unpaid contractor invoices, and massive high-interest loans from shady private lenders. He wasn't paying for trial cancer drugs. He was paying off loan sharks to keep them from breaking his legs. But the true terror wasn't the total debt. It was a single devastating document buried in the 2023 tax prep folder. It was a scanned copy of a promissory note for $450,000 business line of credit secured against our primary marital asset. Our house. My name was on it. I stared at the document, my hands shaking so violently I had to lean against the desk. The signature looked exactly like mine. Mark was a talented forger, apparently. The document stated that if the business defaulted, the lender could immediately place a lien on and eventually foreclose on our home. The house was supposed to be our safety net, my sanctuary. He had signed away my security to fuel his fraudulent fantasy. He hadn't just stolen my retirement fund, he had put a loaded gun to the head of my entire financial existence. My $250,000 retirement money wasn't enough to pay off $800,000 in debt, let alone the $450,000 secured by the house. He had taken my money, bought Sierra a sports car, and was expecting me to inherit a massive, life-ruining debt, all because he was dying. I immediately called Helen back, my voice barely a whisper. Helen, he forged my signature on a $450,000 loan. The house is collateral. We need to move faster than fast. Fraud on a promissory note is a felony, Anna. This changes everything. We are no longer just fighting for your 401k. We are fighting to save your home and keep you from being liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars of his business debt, Helen said. The minute he serves you divorce papers, he will try to stick you with half of that debt. We need to file first. We need to claim the 401k transfer was coerced through medical fraud and that the house loan signature is a forgery. We use the evidence of the cancer scam as proof of his capacity for fraud. It was a grim plan, but it was a plan. My grief was now replaced by a cold, surgical focus. The man I married wasn't just an adulterer. He was a master criminal trying to use my love and my impending widowhood as his shield. I worked with David, the forensic accountant. Through the night, he uncovered one more critical detail. Mark had been systematically draining his business accounts and redirecting the money through a series of shell companies he had registered a year ago. The final destination for a large chunk of cash, aside from Sierra's apartment rent and the sports car down payment, was a bank account in the Cayman Islands. He's planning an exit, David confirmed over a secure line. He's liquidating whatever he can, paying off just enough of the most aggressive lenders to buy time and setting himself up for a clean break. He's going to disappear and leave you holding the bag for everything else. This changed my timeline. I couldn't wait for the lawyers to file the papers through the normal process I needed to hit him where he was most exposed, his new life, and I needed to do it before he could finalize his offshore escape. Mark had made a fundamental mistake. He assumed that because I was the manager who dealt with people and not money, I was incompetent with technical security. He forgot I designed the very system he tried to circumvent. My next step was daring, risky, and incredibly illegal, but I didn't care. Mark deserved to be caught. And to catch him, I needed proof of his exact plan, not just the money trail. I found the details of his encrypted cloud backup. It was tied to a secondary email I knew the password for, an old sentimental one I had given him years ago. I accessed his secure drive and found a file labeled Freedom Plan, May 2024. Inside, I found the final devastating truth. An itinerary. Mark wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to disappear with Sierra to a non-extradition country in 2 weeks. And the final cruel twist? The money he stole from my 401k was exactly enough to buy a small beachfront villa for them to retire on. He had just secured the down payment the day before our confrontation. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady now. I had all the evidence: the fraudulent loan, the stolen retirement fund, the offshore accounts, the forged signature, and the cancer lie Mark was going down, and I wasn't going to wait for a judge. I was going to set a trap so perfect, so public that his new life would crumble before it even began. With the Freedom Plan itinerary printed out and sitting heavily on Helen's desk, the dynamic of the legal fight instantly shifted. We had 2 weeks before Mark vanished into the tropical sunset, leaving me with the house foreclosure notice and $800,000 in bad debt. We couldn't rely on the slow grind of the court system. We needed to operate with surgical precision and speed. We need a public, irrefutable confession, Anna, Helen declared, adjusting her spectacles. Mark will deny the forged signature and claim the 401k was a legitimate, albeit unfortunate, transfer due to joint financial distress. We have the forensic evidence, but a jury loves drama. We need to catch him in the act of escaping. He thinks he's running a perfect scam, I said, a cold edge in my voice. He needs to be so comfortable that he lets his guard down completely. I outlined my initial plan. Mark still believed I was broken, grieving, and financially incompetent. I needed to reinforce that image. First, I had to ensure he continued his chemo routine. I knew he was meeting Sierra on those days. I called him, weeping dramatically, saying I missed him so much and felt awful for pushing him away when he was so sick. "Mark," I sobbed into the phone, "I'm so sorry. I'm just trying to process everything. Please don't stop your treatments. I can't lose you." He bought it hook, line, and sinker. "Thank you, Anna. That means a lot. I'm exhausted, but I'm fighting, mostly for you." He lied smoothly. "I just need a little space to focus on my recovery." The next layer of the trap involved the house I knew the aggressive lenders Mark owed money to were starting to get restless. They were the key to putting him under maximum pressure. Using the contacts David, the forensic accountant, provided, I anonymously tipped off one of the most volatile private lenders. I didn't mention the cancer scam. I just mentioned that their client, Mark, who had taken a significant high-interest loan and used their home as collateral, was planning a permanent international exit in 2 weeks, and that all his liquid assets were being consolidated into a bank account in the Cayman Islands. I watched the clock. Within 48 hours, the pressure cooker exploded. Mark came home, not looking pale from chemo, but sweating with genuine fear. He slammed the door and started pacing. "Anna, what the hell did you do?" he roared. "What are you talking about, Mark?" I asked, feigning confusion and shrinking back. "The loan sharks. They called my office. They know I'm planning to leave. They threatened to put a lien on the house tomorrow if I don't give them a 6-figure payment by the end of the week. They're saying they know about my offshore accounts." I pretended to be devastated. "A lien on our house? But you said your treatment was going okay. Where is all the money going?" "The money is gone," he screamed, his cancer facade completely shattered by panic. "It's all tied up in expenses. You need to pull out the rest of your retirement fund, Anna. We need to stop them from taking the house. It's the only way to buy time until I can secure the final deal." This was my moment. The biggest lie to sell was the biggest asset to lure him back, the remainder of my life savings. "Mark, I can't," I stammered, covering my face. "I already took out the $250,000. I have maybe $100,000 left. I can't touch it. That's everything. Besides, where would I get the rest of the payment? We need nearly $150,000 just to appease them, right? He looked manic. I have almost all of it in the Cayman account, but I can't touch it physically yet. They want cash, Anna. Physical cash. If you can get me $100,000, I can find the rest. We can pay them off and protect the house. He was desperately clinging to the idea that I was his last financial resource. I played along. Okay, Mark. Okay, but only if you can promise me something, I said, looking him straight in the eyes, my voice filled with fake desperation. The lawyers I consulted about the house, they said I need some kind of guarantee. I need you to sign something that says the $100,000 is a loan, not a gift. It says that if something happens to you, my money comes back to me before any creditor touches it. Mark hesitated for only a second. He was seeing the $100,000 figure, not the legal document. He was blinded by the immediate threat and his impending freedom. Fine, I'll sign whatever you want, he snapped, running his hands through his almost bald head. But you need to get the cash tomorrow morning early. That night, I didn't sleep. I met Helen in her office. She had drawn up a document, not a simple loan agreement, but a detailed, irrefutable confession under the guise of an acknowledgement of debt. The document stated that the funds were coming from Anna's separate property, the $100,000 remainder of her 401k, and were to be used only for resolving Mark's premarital, fraudulent business debt. Crucially, it contained a clause stating that Mark acknowledged that the initial $250,000 transfer was done under duress of Mark's purported terminal illness, and that he would repay the full $350,000 upon the resolution of the marriage. It was a Trojan horse of a document. If he signed it, he was implicitly confessing to the entire cancer scam and the coerced theft of my initial fund. The next morning, I went to the bank and withdrew the $100,000 in crisp $100 bills. I put it in a worn canvas bag. I came home, and Mark was waiting. He had changed into a nervous, energized wreck. "Do you have it?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with greed, not love. "Yes, but you need to sign this first, Mark," I said, placing Helen's document on the kitchen table, right next to the canvas bag full of cash. "It's just a formality. The lawyer said I need to protect myself just in case." Mark barely glanced at the paper. He grabbed a pen, his eyes fixed on the bag. Yeah, protect yourself. Where do I sign?" He signed. He didn't read the clauses about purported terminal illness or coerced transfer. He only saw his escape route. He snatched the bag of cash. "Good. I need to leave now. I have to meet them." "Meet them where?" I asked softly. "None of your business. Stay home, Anna. Just wait for my call." He ran out the door. The moment his car screeched away, I made my final call to Helen. "He signed the acknowledgement and he just left with the cash," I confirmed. "Now it's up to you." The plan was set. Helen had filed an emergency injunction and a restraining order. The key was the location of the drop-off. David, using his surveillance tools, had tracked Mark's usual meeting spots. It was a parking garage downtown, a public yet isolated location. Helen's team and the authorities were already in position. The lender Mark was supposed to meet? They weren't a lender. They were 2 uniformed police officers and an investigator from the district attorney's office. I sat alone in the silent house, clutching the signed confession, waiting for the news that would finally deliver justice and end the nightmare. The silence in the house was deafening. It was the kind of silence that amplifies every ticking clock and every frantic beat of your own heart. I sat in the living room, the signed confession in my hand, a single sheet of paper that held more power than Mark's entire, carefully constructed life. The canvas bag was gone, taken by the man who had promised to love me until death, a man who had faked that very death. I didn't have to wait long. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was Helen. I answered on the first ring, my voice tight. "Helen? What happened? Did he show up?" Helen's voice, normally sharp and clinical, had a triumphant edge. "He showed up, Anna, right on time. David's surveillance team got every frame, and the DA's investigators got the rest. He approached the two men waiting, the ones he thought were his aggressive private lenders." She paused, letting the dramatic tension hang in the air. "They weren't lenders, Anna. They were Detective Miller and Agent Reyes. The moment Mark reached out to exchange the canvas bag for the supposed debt waiver, they moved in. He was taken into custody without incident." A long, slow breath escaped me. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was the cessation of extreme tension. Did they read him his rights? I asked, picturing the scene in the grimy parking garage. Oh yes, loud and clear. They recovered the $100,000 cash, which is now logged as evidence of his intent to continue the fraudulent scheme. More importantly, they found something else on him, something we couldn't have planned for. My stomach clenched. What? The passport and the one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands. He had the Freedom Plan itinerary tucked in his inner jacket pocket, along with a stack of withdrawal slips from the joint account. It's a clean sweep, Anna. We have the coercion evidence, the confession, the forgery on the loan, the stolen cash, and the explicit proof of his intent to flee the jurisdiction. The charge won't just be fraud or theft. It'll be wire fraud, forgery, and grand larceny, thanks to the scale of his business debts and the crossing of state lines in his operation. Mark's arrogance was his downfall. He couldn't resist holding on to his escape plan, even as he was trying to secure the final piece of capital. What about Sierra? I asked, a sudden sharp need for her humiliation surfacing. She was waiting in the car, parked discreetly nearby, ready to drive him to the airport. She claimed to be a completely innocent party, just his new girlfriend. The police impounded the red sports car for investigation, as it was purchased with funds derived from his fraudulent scheme. She was released, but her name is now flagged in connection with the investigation. Her luxurious apartment and her quick escape are over, at least for now. The thought of Sierra standing in a cold parking garage, watching her dream life, the sports car, the freedom, the stolen money, drive away on a tow truck, brought a grim satisfaction that I didn't try to suppress. She was a willing accessory to his lies. I spent the next 2 days working with Helen and David, providing meticulous documentation from Mark's laptop to the DA's office. The signed confession was the golden ticket. Helen explained exactly how it worked. Because he signed a document that explicitly mentions the coercion and the purported terminal illness, he has validated the very grounds for voiding the initial $250,000 transfer, she explained. This is no longer a civil dispute over marital assets. This is a criminal case where the court will see the money transfer as stolen property recovered under an emergency proceeding. Then came the truly shocking revelation, the one that put my mind completely at ease. Remember that large wire transfer David tracked to the Cayman Islands account? Helen asked. The one we thought was his clean getaway money? Yes. Was he able to access it? He didn't get the chance. Mark made one crucial, final mistake. While he was careful to use shell companies to transfer the money out of his business, he transferred the bulk of the $250,000, which he stole from your 401k, into an account that, while offshore, was still partially linked to his old business, EIN, for a tax loophole he thought he could exploit. David used the federal injunction we filed, backed by the forgery and fraud evidence, to put an immediate, indefinite freeze on that account. My heart soared. So the money? The money is frozen. It's safe. It's now technically the subject of a criminal restitution order. Mark's creditors can howl all they want, but the DA and the court will prioritize the innocent victim, you, for repayment of the stolen funds. The initial $250,000, plus the $100,000 recovered cash, and potentially even more from the sale of his business assets, will come back to you. Mark hadn't just faked cancer to avoid his debts. He had been trapped by those very debts and his own greed. He thought he was moving to a non-extradition island paradise. But in reality, he was setting up a fully traceable, legally vulnerable bank account that ensured his victims, me, would get our money back. The problem of the $800,000 in debt and the $450,000 forged loan against the house, that was no longer my problem either. Because we established that the signature on the $450,000 loan was forged under a fraudulent business operation, you are entirely shielded from that liability, Helen confirmed. The debt belongs solely to Mark and his company. The lenders can sue him, but they can't touch your separate assets or place a lien on the house based on that forged document, especially now that he is facing felony charges for the forgery itself. Mark's life was officially dismantled. His freedom was gone. His reputation was ruined. His mistress was gone. His stolen money was frozen. And his catastrophic debts were now his sole burden. The news outlets picked up the story immediately. A prominent local businessman, faking terminal cancer to steal his wife's retirement and flee the country. The story was a goldmine of scandal. I sat there, not crying, not celebrating, but simply absorbing the quiet magnitude of my victory. I hadn't just saved myself. I had meticulously orchestrated the complete destruction of a narcissistic fraudster. But the story wasn't quite over. I still had one final move to make, the absolute total public humiliation of his mother. Mark's mother, the one person who knew Mark better than anyone and had always hated me. With Mark safely behind bars, facing charges that would ensure a lengthy sentence and a lifetime of financial ruin, my focus shifted to the final loose end, Eleanor, Mark's mother. Eleanor was a society woman, sharp-tongued and perpetually dissatisfied. She had never approved of me, a working-class girl with a corporate brain who lacked the necessary social graces. Throughout my marriage, she treated me as a temporary fixture, an inconvenient distraction for her golden boy. When Mark was dying, she was conspicuously absent, claiming the sight of her son wasting away was too taxing on her nerves. Her concern was for her reputation, not her son's supposed health. I knew she was the last person who needed to see Mark succeed, yet she always shielded him from the consequences of his recklessness. In my cold, calculated mind, her complicity lay in her unwavering belief that Mark was untouchable. Her failure to instill any moral compass, I decided to pay her a visit. I dressed in simple tailored black, the perfect attire for a grieving, betrayed widow. I drove to her sprawling, impeccably manicured estate in the hills. When Eleanor opened the door, her expression was a mix of mild irritation and forced pity. "Anna, I suppose you've heard the news." "Dreadful, simply dreadful," she said without inviting me in. She looked distressed, but not for Mark's well-being. She was distressed about her social calendar. "Yes, Eleanor, I've heard," I replied, my voice perfectly soft, almost childlike. "May I come in? I need to talk about what's next." She sighed dramatically and stepped aside. We sat in her pristine drawing room, surrounded by antique furniture. "Honestly, Anna, I knew his business was struggling," Eleanor began, sipping her tea with a steady hand. "Mark has always been ambitious, but perhaps too trusting. These creditors must have pushed him over the edge. It's a tragedy." "It is a tragedy," I agreed. "But Mark wasn't pushed over the edge, Eleanor. He jumped, and he tried to drag me with him." I leaned forward, dropping the act, my eyes locked onto hers, cold and hard. "You knew he had mounting debts, didn't you? You didn't believe the cancer story, did you? You avoided visiting because you knew the whole thing smelled of fraud." Eleanor flinched. The mask cracked. "How dare you? I was protecting myself from the emotional toll. I certainly did not know about any medical deception." "But you knew about the financial deception," I pressed. "You knew he was using my money. Why didn't you intervene? Why didn't you stop him from signing a forged promissory note against my house?" "It was his only option," she burst out, dropping her cup slightly, her voice rising in genuine anger. "He was going to lose everything. Your little 401k was a drop in the ocean compared to what he needed." I told him, "Mark, you need to consolidate your assets. You need to protect your reputation." This was his mess, and he chose to handle it. He chose to steal my future and leave me bankrupt to pay his debt, I corrected. "And you let him, because you thought my loss was a necessary sacrifice for your son's survival. You never saw me as family. You saw me as an easily manipulated financial resource." Eleanor glared at me, now fully exposed. "And you let him get arrested. You could have just filed for divorce quietly. Now our name is ruined. The headlines are everywhere. Son of prominent local family fakes cancer for insurance fraud." This was the opening I needed. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile that reached none of my eyes. "That's where you're wrong, Eleanor. Mark was arrested because I tipped off the authorities. I orchestrated the sting. I gave the DA the signed confession. I worked with my lawyers and a forensic accountant to freeze his escape funds in the Cayman Islands. He is now facing multiple felony charges, including forgery and wire fraud. His business assets are gone. His mistress is gone, and he has zero chance of getting a light sentence because of the sheer cruelty of the modus operandi." Eleanor's face went white, far whiter than Mark's ever did in his fake illness. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. She was paralyzed, not by grief, but by the shattering realization that the working-class girl had taken down her golden boy and his entire financial kingdom. You set him up?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't set him up," I stated firmly, standing up. "I simply made sure the path he had chosen led exactly where it was supposed to go. To justice he stole from me, Eleanor. He tried to kill me, financially and emotionally. I just finished the job he started." I walked toward the door, then paused at the threshold. "There's one last thing you should know," I said. the $250,000 he stole from my 401k, plus the $100,000 cash he took just before his arrest, that money and more is safe. It's being returned to me under a criminal restitution order. Your son will serve time. He will be liable for the $800,000 in debts, and he will have absolutely nothing to show for his spectacular deception. He leaves prison with only the debt and the notoriety you now hate. And you get off scot-free? She choked out, tears of pure, furious shame welling in her eyes. No, Eleanor, I said, opening the door. I had to endure months of nursing a dying man who was laughing at me behind my back, and I lost $250,000 for a few agonizing months. I don't get off scot-free. I get justice. You, on the other hand, get to deal with the public humiliation, the legal fees, and the shame of having a son who is a convicted criminal. You get to manage the fallout of his ruined reputation, all alone. I walked out, leaving Eleanor sitting amidst her expensive antiques, the tea in her fragile cup growing cold. I felt a sense of finality, not of triumph, but of balance restored. I had exposed the fraudster, protected my future, and ensured that everyone who participated in, or stood by during, the deception faced the consequences. The saga of the fake cancer was over. My recovery had begun. The days and weeks following Mark's arrest were a blur of legal activity, yet I felt a quiet sense of control I hadn't experienced in years. The dramatic chaos of the fraud had given way to the methodical calm of the courtroom. Helen, my lawyer, moved swiftly. We filed for divorce, citing Mark's extreme cruelty and financial fraud as the core reasons, ensuring the case moved with the urgency of a criminal matter. Because the evidence was so overwhelming, the signed confession, the forged loan document, the flight risk itinerary, and the testimony regarding the fake cancer, Mark's defense attorney, a weary public defender, advised him to take a plea deal. Mark, ever the narcissist, initially refused, convinced he could charm his way out of the charges. He learned quickly that a jury of his peers wouldn't find terminal illness fraud charming. The criminal sentencing day was the final act of the tragedy. I attended not for closure, but to bear witness. Mark looked utterly defeated. The confidence that had defined him was gone, replaced by the hollow gaze of a man realizing the gravity of his failures. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, forgery, and grand larceny, with strict restitution orders attached to his sentence. The judge, clearly moved by the cruelty of the cancer lie, delivered a scathing summary. Mr. Dalton, you weaponized your wife's love and empathy to commit an act of calculated financial destruction. This is not mere business failure. This is deep-seated betrayal. The sentence reflects the severity of the emotional and financial damage you inflicted. Mark briefly glanced at me as he was led away. His expression wasn't remorseful. It was accusatory. He still believed I was the villain, the one who ruined his perfect plan. He sent me one final pathetic letter from prison a few weeks later. It wasn't an apology. It was a rambling list of his discomforts, followed by the chilling line, "I hope you enjoy my debt, Anna. I hope it crushes you." He signed it, "Your husband." I burned the letter immediately. He ceased to exist in my world. The financial recovery was surprisingly quick. The restitution order meant that the frozen $250,000 from the Cayman Islands account was returned to my name almost immediately. The recovered $100,000 in cash from the sting was also returned, minus a small portion for court fees. I had secured the entire $350,000 that he had tricked me into handing over. It wasn't profit, but it was the full restoration of my security and my retirement future. The divorce was finalized shortly after the sentencing. The judge deemed the house to be mine entirely, as my funds and labor had significantly contributed to its purchase and maintenance, and Mark's forged loan was successfully voided, insulating me from the debt. The $800,000 in business debts, the failed construction company, and the forged $450,000 loan all remain the sole, crushing burden of Mark Dalton. Despite the legal victory, I knew I couldn't stay in the bungalow. Every corner held a memory. The nervous excitement of the renovation, the late-night talks about children, and the dark, quiet fear I felt while nursing a husband who was lying about his death. The house was a monument to a fraud. I hired a real estate agent and sold it within a month. I didn't sentimentalize the process. It was a transaction, a final severing of ties to the past. The sale gave me the capital to finally buy a beautiful small condo in a completely different neighborhood, a place where the air was clean and unburdened by deceit. I returned to my career, but not to the same old job. I used the money from the house sale and my restored savings to launch my own independent consultancy, specializing in financial fraud detection for small businesses. Ironically, the exact thing Mark had so desperately avoided. I used the pain, the knowledge, and the digital forensic skills I had polished during my revenge to build something entirely my own, something honest. I started dating again, hesitantly at first. I was wary, of course. I carried the lesson that even the most charming confidence can be a carefully constructed lie. But I also carried the strength I gained. I was no longer the naive woman who handed over her future based on pity. I was the woman who built a meticulous plan, executed it flawlessly, and brought a criminal to justice. My journey wasn't about the money or the house. It was about reclaiming my agency and my trust in my own intelligence. Mark thought he was dealing with a simple wife. He found out he was dealing with a force of nature today. Sitting in my new apartment, surrounded by walls that hold no ghosts, I can finally look back at the ordeal of Mark Dalton not as a victim, but as a survivor. The experience fundamentally changed me. I lost my innocence, but I gained an invaluable, unshakable strength. The greatest weapon Mark had wasn't his lies, but my empathy. He used my capacity for love and pity as his primary source of capital. He counted on the fact that no woman would question a dying man. This experience taught me a profound lesson. Trust must always be earned, and your intuition is your most valuable asset. The moment Mrs. Henderson told me about the red sports car and the giggling blonde, that cold dread I felt, that was my intuition screaming. I ignored it initially because the truth was too painful to bear. Never again will I let comfortable denial override hard evidence. As for the others involved in the periphery of Mark's disaster, Sierra was publicly humiliated when the local news ran stories about her involvement with a convicted fraudster, detailing the sports car and the luxury apartment that were purchased with stolen retirement funds. The last I heard, she fled the city, her dream life ending before it truly began, leaving her with a shattered reputation and no stolen cash. Her short, self-serving partnership with Mark was a failure. Eleanor, Mark's mother, was forced to confront the wreckage. The social fallout was immense. Her reputation, the one thing she prized above all else, was tarnished by her son's conviction and her own complicity. She now faces the task of managing Mark's mountainous legal fees and his future parole hearings, a far cry from the glamorous social schedule she once kept. She got exactly what she deserved: the lonely burden of her son's toxic legacy. My healing process wasn't instantaneous. For months, I found myself double-checking receipts, locking my car 3 times, and scrutinizing every new person I met. But time, therapy, and the quiet satisfaction of rebuilding my life on a foundation of honesty worked their magic. I use the trauma to create something positive. My consultancy, I now teach people, especially women, how to spot the red flags that I missed, how to read a balance sheet, how to never sign away your future based on a wave of emotion. I often think about that final moment in the apartment lobby. Mark cornered, yelling that I was finished. He never understood that losing him wasn't the end of my story. It was the preface to my greatest chapter. He intended to destroy my financial security and my emotional well-being, but he only ended up exposing my inner resilience. I took the fire he started, and instead of letting it consume me, I used it to forge a stronger future. To those of you watching, perhaps recognizing fragments of your own story in mine, I want to leave you with this stark truth. Do not let love blind you to your financial reality. If someone tells you they are better with the numbers and insists on handling everything alone, see it as a warning sign. If their behavior doesn't match their dire circumstances, trust your gut. Never, ever allow a partner to pressure you into transferring your personal savings based on urgency, fear, or guilt, even if they claim they are facing death. Your security is sacred. My name is Anna. I was deceived, betrayed, and robbed by the man I married, who faked his death to take my life savings. But I refused to be a victim. I fought back, I got justice, and I rebuilt a life that is truly mine, free of the shadow of a lie. I hope my story empowers you to look closer, question harder, and fight for your own truth. Thank you for listening to this difficult confession. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments section below.